All right, I know what you're thinking. You saw the title and you clicked because you're either angry or curious, and either way you're here. So let me explain myself before you come at me with pitchforks. I've been farming for 30 years, 30 years of growing food in the dirt, and I have watched the raised bed become the default recommendation for every single person who wants to start a garden, every gardening book, every YouTube channel, every Instagram account. Raised beds, raised beds, raised beds. Like it's the only way to grow food. Like if you don't have 4-foot by 8-foot cedar boxes with perfectly mixed soil and drip irrigation, you might as well not even bother. And I'm here to tell you that's nonsense. Raised beds are not necessary for most people. They are dramatically more expensive than in-ground gardening, and in many situations, they're actually worse than just planting directly in the earth. There, I said it. Now let me back it up. First, let me be clear about what I'm not saying. I'm not saying raised beds are bad. I'm not saying nobody should use them. There are specific situations where raised beds make perfect sense, and I'll talk about those. What I am saying is that the current gardening culture has elevated raised beds to an almost religious status, and people are spending hundreds or even thousands of dollars on them when they don't need to. People who have perfectly good soil in their backyard are filling cedar boxes with store-bought mix because someone on the internet told them that's how gardening works. That's the part that drives me crazy. That's the part I want to push back on. Let me start with the money, because this is where the argument gets real, fast. Let's say you want to build a modest garden, 4 raised beds, each 4 feet by 8 feet. That's 128 square feet of growing space. Not a lot, honestly. That's a small garden. Now let's price it out. Cedar lumber for the frames, which is what everybody recommends because it resists rot, is going to run you about $50 to $75 per bed at current prices. That's $200 to $300 just for the wood. Then, you need to fill them with soil. A 4 by 8 bed that's 12 inches deep requires about 32 cubic feet of soil mix. At around $6 to $8 per cubic foot for a decent raised bed mix, that's roughly $200 per bed. Times 4 beds, that's $800 in soil alone. Plus, hardware, corner brackets, screws, landscape fabric if you use it, maybe a drip irrigation kit. All in, you're looking at $1,200 to $1,500 for 4 small raised beds. $1,500 to grow some tomatoes and lettuce. Now let me tell you what that same garden costs in the ground. You take a spade, you turn over a 4 by 8 section of your existing soil, you add a couple of bags of compost at $4 each, you mix it in, and you plant. Cost, maybe $20 in compost plus the cost of seeds. Total investment under $50 for the exact same growing space. And your in-ground bed has something that the raised bed doesn't have, a connection to the vast reservoir of soil beneath it. Roots can go as deep as they want. Water can move up from the water table through capillary action. Earthworms and soil organisms can migrate in from the surrounding earth. Your plants have access to an entire ecosystem. In a raised bed, your plants are growing in a box, a very expensive box. Now I can already hear the raised bed defenders marshaling their arguments. Let me address them one by one. Argument number 1. My native soil is terrible. Okay, fair. Some people have genuinely awful soil. Heavy clay that drains like a bathtub, pure sand that holds nothing. Soil contaminated with lead or other heavy metals from old paint or industrial activity. Rocky ground where you'd need a jackhammer to plant a seed. In these situations, yes, raised beds make sense. You're creating growing space where usable growing space doesn't exist. I get it. I support it. If your native soil is toxic or completely unworkable, build a raised bed. That's one of the legitimate use cases. But here's the thing. Most people's soil is not terrible. It's just not great. It's average, normal soil that could be improved with some compost and time. And instead of improving it, people abandon it. They say my soil is clay, and they build a raised bed on top of it and fill it with purchased mix, and they never develop the soil that's right there under their feet. That clay soil, with a few years of compost additions and cover cropping, could become fantastic growing ground. I know because my soil started as clay, pure, sticky, red clay that would crack in summer and turn to swamp in spring. It took me 5 years of adding compost and organic matter to turn it into the dark, crumbly, worm-filled soil I have today. 5 years. And now, it grows better than any raised bed mix I've ever seen because it has 30 years of biological development that no store-bought mix can replicate. Argument number 2, raised beds warm up faster in spring, so I can plant earlier. This is true. The elevated soil in a raised bed is exposed to air on all sides, which means it warms up faster than ground-level soil in spring. You might gain a week or 2 of planting time. Maybe. In my experience, the difference is about 5 to 10 degrees at the most, and it's only significant in early spring. By May, the ground-level soil is caught up. So you're spending $1,500 to gain maybe a week of planting time. I can achieve the same thing by laying black plastic on my in-ground beds for 2 weeks in early spring. Cost: about $8 for a roll of plastic sheeting. Same result. Fraction of the price. Argument number 3, raised beds have better drainage. True, and this is both an advantage and a disadvantage. If you have extremely wet soil that stays waterlogged, raised beds drain better and your roots won't drown. Good. But raised beds also dry out much faster than in-ground beds. Much faster. That soil is exposed to air on all sides, including the sides, and it loses moisture rapidly. In the heat of summer, I've seen raised beds that needed watering every single day. Every day. Meanwhile, my in-ground beds, with their deep root access and connection to the water table, might go 3 to 5 days between waterings. Over a full growing season, the raised bed gardener is using dramatically more water. In a drought year, that can be the difference between a harvest and a dead garden. I've done side-by-side comparisons on my own property. Same tomato variety. Same planting date. Same fertilizer, one in a raised bed, one in the ground. The in-ground tomato consistently outperformed the raised bed tomato in water efficiency. It needed about half as much supplemental water over the season. The raised bed tomato produced well, but I had to water it far more often to get it there. When people tell me raised beds are easier, I ask easier how? You're watering twice as often. Argument number 4, raised beds look nice. I'll give you that one. They do look nice. Clean lines, organized, tidy, Instagram-worthy. And if aesthetics are important to you, if you need your garden to look a certain way because of an HOA or because you want it to match your landscaping, then sure, raised beds are the way to go. Beauty has value, and I'm not going to argue against it. But if you're choosing raised beds purely for looks and then struggling with the cost and the watering and the soil replacement, it's worth asking whether you're gardening for food or gardening for photos. Argument number 5, raised beds reduce back strain because you don't have to bend as far. Valid point. If you have mobility issues, back problems, knee problems, or you're getting older and bending down is painful, raised beds at the right height can make gardening accessible. This is one of the genuinely excellent use cases for raised beds, and I'd never argue against it. Accessibility matters. If a raised bed is the difference between someone being able to garden or not, then it's worth every penny. But for able-bodied people, you're paying $1,500 to avoid bending over. I'm 53 years old. I've been bending over in the garden for 30 years, and my back is fine. You know what's better for your back than a raised bed? A foam kneeling pad that costs $12 and a broad fork that lets you work the soil without hunching. You can get down to ground level and back up again. It's actually good exercise. Our bodies were designed to bend and squat and kneel. We've been farming in the ground for 10,000 years. The raised bed has existed for maybe 50. Somehow, humanity managed. Here's what really bothers me about the raised bed craze. It's created a barrier to entry. New gardeners see these beautiful raised bed setups online, and they think that's what a garden is supposed to look like. They price it out. They realize it's going to cost them $1,000 or more, and they don't start. They don't start because they think they can't afford to garden when in reality they could be growing food in their existing soil for the cost of a bag of compost and a packet of seeds. The raised bed industrial complex, and I'm only half joking when I call it that, has convinced people that you need to buy your way into gardening. You don't. You need dirt and seeds and water and sunlight. That's it. Everything else is optional. I've grown more food in the bare ground than most people will grow in a lifetime of raised beds. Not because I'm a better gardener, but because I invested my time and money into improving my existing soil instead of importing new soil into boxes. Every dollar I would have spent on lumber and purchased soil mix, I spent on compost, mulch, cover crop seeds, and tools. And that investment went directly into the ground, into the permanent, cumulative improvement of the soil on my land. The money didn't go to a box that will rot in 10 years and need to be replaced. It went into living soil that gets better every year. Let me talk about the long-term economics, because this is the part nobody mentions. A cedar raised bed lasts about 8 to 12 years before the wood rots and needs to be replaced. The soil inside compacts and depletes over time and needs to be refreshed or replaced every 3 to 5 years. So every decade or so, you're basically rebuilding and refilling your raised beds from scratch. Another $1,000 to $1,500. And another. And another. Over 30 years, you could easily spend $5,000 or more on raised beds. My in-ground garden over the same 30 years has cost me maybe $200 total in compost that I didn't make myself, plus the one-time cost of tools. Everything else has been free. Free compost from kitchen scraps and leaves, free mulch from straw and grass clippings, free cover crop seeds saved from previous years. The in-ground garden is not just cheaper, it's radically, absurdly cheaper. And the soil gets better every year instead of needing replacement. That's the key difference. In-ground soil, properly maintained with compost and cover crops and mulch, is a compounding asset. It appreciates over time. Raised bed soil is a depreciating asset. It compacts, depletes, and eventually needs to be replaced. You're renting growing space in a raised bed. You're building equity in the ground. Now, I promised I'd talk about when raised beds do make sense. Here's the list. If your native soil is contaminated with heavy metals, build a raised bed with clean soil. This is a health issue, and it's non-negotiable. If you're gardening on concrete, a rooftop, or a surface where there is no soil, you obviously need a container of some kind. If you have severe drainage problems that can't be fixed with organic matter amendments, raising the bed above the water table can help. If you have physical limitations that make getting down to ground level painful or impossible, raised beds at the appropriate height are a godsend. If you're renting and can't invest in permanent soil improvement, a portable raised bed makes sense. And if you just love the look and you have the budget and the water supply to support them, go for it. I'm not the garden police. But if you're a beginner with a backyard, with normal soil that's just kind of meh, and you're looking at raised beds because the internet told you that's how it's done, stop. Go outside. Dig a hole. Look at what you've got. Is it soil? Does it have some color? Are there any worms? If the answer is yes, you can garden in that soil. Start adding compost. Start improving it. Invest in the ground, not in a box. Your future self and your wallet will thank you. I want to tell you something that happened a few years ago. A young couple moved in down the road, and they came to me for advice. They wanted to start a garden. First thing they said was, "We're going to build raised beds." I asked why. They said, "Because that's what everyone does." I said, "Come look at your backyard with me." We walked over, I knelt down, pushed my hand into their soil. It was decent, not great, but decent. Loamy with some clay, had worms, had some organic matter. I told them this soil is perfectly fine. Skip the raised beds. Spend that money on compost and mulch instead. They looked skeptical, but they trusted me. That was 3 years ago. This past summer, those two were pulling peppers and tomatoes and squash out of that backyard soil like it was nothing. Their garden looked beautiful. Their soil, after 3 years of compost and mulch, was dark and rich and full of life. And they'd spent maybe $150 total. They bring me tomatoes every August now as a thank you. Best investment advice I ever gave anyone. Look, I know this video is going to make some people mad. The raised bed community is passionate, and I respect that. If you've built raised beds and you love them and they're working for you, that's great. I'm genuinely happy for you. Keep doing what you're doing. But if you're on the fence, if you're a beginner trying to figure out how to start, if you're looking at the price tag of a raised bed setup and feeling overwhelmed, I want you to know there's another way, a cheaper way, a simpler way, a way that connects you directly to the earth instead of separating you from it with boards and purchased soil. Just plant in the ground. It's what humans have been doing since we stopped being hunter-gatherers. It works. It's always worked. And with a little compost, a little patience, and a lot of attention, it'll work for you too. Save your money, build your soil, grow your food. And if someone tells you that you need a raised bed to be a real gardener, send them to me. I've got 30 years of in-ground harvests that say otherwise. Fight me.